Welcome. My name is Darius, and I want to share with you a true story that will shake you to your core. When Dr. Marcus Oakley's brow furrowed during the examination and he carefully asked who had been treating her previously, Elaine answered simply that it was her husband, a gynecologist himself. But the doctor fell silent. He set down his instruments and told her she needed urgent laboratory work because what he was seeing shouldn't be there. His tone sent a chill of dread through her heart. She couldn't yet comprehend what had so alarmed this experienced specialist. In that moment, her familiar world, where Sterling was not only her loving husband but also her trusted physician, cracked open for the first time. Elaine sat in the examination chair, trying not to dwell on how strange the doctor's question had sounded. Marcus Oakley seemed like a serious, thoughtful man, not someone who spoke carelessly. His office was located in a new medical center on the city's outskirts, and she had only decided to come because the pain had become unbearable. For the past 6 months, she had been suffering from sharp spasms in her lower abdomen that came in waves, forcing her to double over in agony. Her menstrual cycle had become completely irregular. The bleeding was painful and unpredictable. Each time, Sterling would reassure her, explaining that such changes were natural at 42 years old and that her body was simply adjusting. But something inside her resisted his explanations. Her intuition screamed that what was happening to her body was far from normal. When Sterling left to visit his ailing mother in Atlanta, she decided to make a secret appointment with an outside physician. Dr. Oakley carefully studied her ultrasound results, shaking his head occasionally. His face remained professionally neutral, but Elaine noticed the muscles in his jaw tightening. The doctor adjusted the sensor angle multiple times, trying to capture a clearer image. Finally, he set the device down and turned to face her. Something in his eyes made her instinctively clench her fists. It wasn't merely professional interest, it was closer to shock at what he'd discovered. "You said your husband has been treating you for 5 years?" he asked, wiping his hands with antiseptic. "And what exactly has he been prescribing during all this time?" Elaine tried to recall. Usually hormonal medications, pain relievers, and occasionally anti-inflammatory suppositories. Sterling always insisted that he knew her body better than any outside doctor could. Dr. Oakley walked over to the ultrasound monitor and pointed to an irregularly shaped dark mass in the uterine area. "Do you see this growth?" he said, his voice strained. "It's a foreign body, and by all indications, it's been there for a very long time. It appears to be an old-style intrauterine device, an IUD, that has become embedded in the tissue." Elaine felt the blood drain from her face. "An IUD?" she repeated, unable to believe her own ears. "I've never had an IUD. I would know if someone had inserted something inside me." The doctor took out the medical chart she'd brought with her and flipped through the pages. "There are no records here of an intrauterine contraceptive being inserted," he confirmed. "But things like this don't appear on their own. Someone must have placed it there, and it didn't happen yesterday." Elaine tried to focus, to recall anything that could explain what was happening, but her memory offered nothing. She had always been afraid of IUDs, considering them invasive and dangerous. Sterling knew about her fears and had never suggested that method of contraception. "I need to run additional tests," Dr. Oakley said, rising from his desk. "Inflammatory markers, tumor markers, the complete spectrum. What I'm seeing on the ultrasound raises serious concerns. The tissues surrounding the foreign body are altered. There are clear signs of chronic inflammation." He left the office, leaving her alone with terrifying thoughts. Elaine tried to calm herself, searching for a rational explanation. Perhaps the doctor was mistaken. Perhaps it was something else, not an IUD. A few minutes later, a nurse entered the room with supplies for drawing blood. The young woman worked silently, but Elaine noticed her exchange a meaningful glance with the doctor when he returned. There was a silent dialogue between them, filled with professional anxiety. "Doctor, the inflammatory markers are extremely elevated," the nurse said quietly, showing him the results of a rapid test. Elaine heard those words and felt everything inside her constrict with fear. Something was seriously wrong with her body, something she had never suspected. Dr. Oakley sat across from her and folded his hands on the desk. "Elaine Thames," he said gravely, "I need to be absolutely honest with you. What is in your uterus poses a genuine threat to your health. It's not just a foreign body. It's a source of chronic inflammation that could have triggered severe tissue changes." He pulled out a referral form and began filling it out. "You need immediate hospitalization at the County General Medical Center for surgical removal of this object. The operation cannot be delayed. Every day we wait increases the risks." Elaine stared at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. Just this morning, she had been an ordinary woman with chronic pain, and now she was being told about urgent surgery and serious health risks. How could this have happened? How could she not have known what was occurring inside her own body? "And one more thing," the doctor added, handing her the referral. "Given the circumstances under which this foreign body may have ended up in your system without your knowledge, I strongly recommend you contact law enforcement. What happened to you may constitute a felony." Those words sounded like a death sentence. Elaine took the referral with trembling hands, still not fully grasping the magnitude of what she was facing. A crime. Who could have committed a crime against her? Who had access to her body when she was vulnerable? A single thought, terrifying and impossible, was already beginning to form in the depths of her mind. A thought she was reluctant to entertain, but which explained everything. The thought that the person she trusted most in the world might have betrayed that trust in the most monstrous way imaginable. Leaving the medical center, Elaine felt the world she had inhabited for the past 15 years collapsing around her. A world where Sterling was a loving husband and a caring doctor, where their marriage seemed solid and dependable. Now that world was fracturing, and she dreaded imagining what would be revealed when it finally shattered completely. The operating room at County General Medical Center was flooded with bright light when the surgeon, Dr. Vernon Harmon, began extracting the foreign body from Elaine's uterus. What he discovered made him freeze momentarily, instruments in hand. The IUD, blackened with time, was so deeply embedded in the tissue that its removal required extreme precision. The device's metallic arms had literally cut into the uterine walls, leaving traces of necrosis and inflammation. "Good grief," he muttered, carefully examining the extracted object. "This is a Dalkin Shield IUD. These were banned from use over 10 years ago because of their high cancer risk." The assisting nurse handed him a sterile container, and the surgeon placed the IUD inside. Even beneath layers of biological buildup, the distinctive shape of the device was visible, a device once hailed as revolutionary contraception. Dr. Harmon continued the operation, thoroughly cleaning the damaged tissues and controlling the bleeding. The inflammatory process had affected a significant area, and in some places the tissues looked suspicious. He took several samples for pathology, understanding that the results might be extremely unfavorable. 8 years of a carcinogenic device in her body could not have passed without consequences. When the surgery was complete, the surgeon personally escorted the patient to the recovery unit. Elaine slowly emerged from anesthesia, her mind gradually clearing. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was the concerned face of Dr. Harmon leaning over her bed. "The operation was successful," he said softly, though his tone carried a warning. "We removed the foreign body. But what we found raises serious concerns." He showed her a clear container with the blackened IUD inside. "The device has a serial number, N3847. We'll definitely run it through the database to determine where it came from." Elaine looked at the piece of metal that had been poisoning her body for 8 years and couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. The IUD looked sinister, its surface covered in a dark film, and the sharp edges had clearly traumatized the surrounding tissues. How could something like this have ended up inside her without her knowledge? How could she not have felt this foreign body? Dr. Harmon explained that old-style devices were often inserted without adequate pain relief, and patients might not remember the procedure, especially if it was performed under general anesthesia during another surgery. But the main concern wasn't the IUD's presence itself, it was the consequences of its prolonged existence in her body. The Dalkin Shield IUD had been removed from the market precisely because of its ability to cause malignant tumors. A few hours later, a woman in a severe suit entered the room and introduced herself as Detective Nia Blunt. She took out a recorder and a notebook, settling into a chair beside the bed. Her appearance meant the case had gained official status, that what happened was being treated as a possible crime. "Elaine Thames," the detective began, "I need to ask you a few questions about how this device might have ended up in your body. Did your husband have access to your medical records? When was the last time you were under general anesthesia?" These questions struck her like hammer blows, each one bringing her closer to the terrible truth. Elaine tried to concentrate, recalling all the medical procedures of recent years. She had only been under general anesthesia once, 8 years ago when she had her appendix removed. At the time, Sterling had insisted that the surgery take place at his private practice, not the city hospital. "Why would you need outside doctors?" he'd asked. "I'll supervise everything myself. I'll be there every step of the way." The detective carefully recorded every word, seeking clarification from time to time. Who else was in the operating room? How long did the surgery last? What was the post-operative period like? Elaine answered mechanically, but with every question, a terrible suspicion grew in her soul. Sterling had indeed controlled everything. He had been there from start to finish. Detective Blunt explained that inserting an IUD without a patient's consent qualified as a serious crime against the person, especially considering the device used was known to be hazardous to health. The maximum penalty for such actions could be up to 10 years in federal prison. The next day, the hospital room phone rang. It was the Medical Records Laboratory. The voice on the line sounded official and detached, but the information delivered was like an electric shock. The IUD with serial number N3847 was registered as having been disposed of on March 15, 8 years ago, at the very women's health practice managed by Sterling Thames. Detective Blunt, who was present during the conversation, immediately contacted her colleagues to obtain the disposal records. Elaine lay in bed, feeling the last hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding crumble into dust. The facts were stacking up into a horrifying portrait of betrayal by the man she had entrusted with her life. Dr. Harmon returned with the results of the urgent pathology report, and his face was grim. Tissue samples taken during the operation show the presence of atypical cells characteristic of a precancerous condition. Stage 3 dysplasia requires immediate additional treatment and permanent oncological monitoring. This is a direct consequence of long-term exposure to the carcinogenic device, the surgeon explained. If the IUD had remained in your body for another year or two, we would be dealing with advanced cancer. You were incredibly fortunate that you went to Dr. Oakley when you did. His words sounded like a death sentence, not only for her health but for her marriage. Elaine asked for her phone to call Sterling and tell him what had happened. But when she dialed his number, an unfamiliar woman answered. "Hello, who is this?" a woman's voice asked with slight irritation. "Sterling is busy right now. He's attending to a sick patient." Elaine silently disconnected the call, realizing her husband's deceit stretched far wider than she could have imagined. Detective Blunt received copies of the documents from Sterling's practice via fax. According to the medical device disposal log, IUD N3847 had been written off as defective and subject to destruction. The signature next to the entry belonged personally to the practice manager. But instead of being destroyed, the device had been used for the secret sterilization of his own wife. Detective Blunt explained to Elaine that they now had sufficient evidence to open a criminal case. Witness testimonies, medical records, expert analysis results, everything pointed to the deliberate actions of Sterling Thames. All that remained was to obtain his confession or find additional evidence confirming the motive for the crime. Elaine lay in the hospital room staring at the ceiling, trying to grasp the scale of the betrayal. The man she had lived with for 15 years, whom she had entrusted with her body and soul, was capable of monstrous cruelty. He wasn't simply lying to her. He was methodically destroying her health, depriving her of the ability to have children, and exposing her to the risk of cancer. But the most horrifying realization was that all this time, Sterling had been playing the role of a loving husband and doctor. He had comforted her when she complained of pain, prescribed treatments that couldn't possibly help, knowing perfectly well the true cause of her suffering. Every consolation, every explanation about age-related changes, it was all a cynical lie. Now she had to fight not only for her health, but also find the strength to confront the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court, the investigation, the need to prove what seemed incredible even to herself. But most importantly, she had to find the answer to the question that tormented her most. Why did Sterling do this? What compelled him to commit such a crime against his loving wife? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube knows you're interested in stories like this and recommends more quality narratives. Discharged from the hospital on the third day after surgery, Elaine headed straight to the women's health practice where Sterling worked. Detective Blunt had given her special permission to examine her husband's office as part of the investigation. The security guard reluctantly let her in, constantly glancing at his phone, as if debating whether to warn the manager about his wife's visit. Everything in Sterling's office was familiar down to the smallest detail. The massive oak desk, the leather chair, the framed diplomas on the walls, the photograph from their trip to Hawaii. But now, this familiar setting seemed like a backdrop concealing a monstrous secret. Elaine walked over to the safe, whose combination she knew by heart. It was their wedding date. Inside the safe were documents Sterling considered especially important. Among them, she found a thick folder containing medical device logs from the past 10 years. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, searching for the entry from March 15th, 8 years ago. And there it was. The entry about the disposal of IUDN 3847, next to which was Sterling's sprawling signature. The office door opened quietly, and a young woman in a white coat appeared in the doorway. Elaine recognized her. It was Olivia Rhee, one of the clinic's nurses, always cheerful and efficient. But now Olivia's face showed confusion and fear at the sight of the manager's wife holding the documents. "Elaine Thames," Olivia said uncertainly. "What are you doing here?" "Dr. Thames said you were in the hospital after surgery." The nurse was holding something that she tried to hide behind her back, but Elaine managed to catch a glimpse of the distinctive packaging of a pregnancy test. "I've already been discharged," Elaine replied, carefully studying the young woman's face. Olivia looked distressed. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes darted nervously. "What is that in your hand?" Elaine asked, though she already guessed the answer. The nurse became even more flustered and pressed the test to her chest. "It's personal," Olivia mumbled, but her voice sounded unconvincing. Elaine noticed a gold ring with a small diamond sparkling on the ring finger of Olivia's right hand. The ring was strikingly similar to her own wedding ring, which Sterling had given her 15 years ago. "That's a beautiful ring," Elaine commented, pointing to the nurse's hand. "Where did you get something like that?" Olivia instinctively hid her hand behind her back, but it was too late. "It was a gift from my sweetheart," she replied quietly, and a note of defiance entered her voice, as if she were protecting something very dear. Elaine felt everything inside her tighten with the premonition of new revelations. Did Sterling's betrayal stretch even further than she could have imagined? Did he have a mistress in addition to the secret sterilization, someone to whom he gave the exact same rings he'd given his wife? Olivia tried to leave the office, but in the hallway, an older woman with a noticeably rounded belly called out to her. Elaine recognized her as Marina Vance, a longtime patient of the clinic who had been monitored there for years. The woman looked tired but happy, clearly expecting a child at a mature age. "Olivia, thank you so much," the pregnant woman said, embracing the nurse. "If it weren't for you, I don't know how we would have managed. The housing for me and my kids. Dr. Thames is such a kind man. He helped with the apartment paperwork. My older children are so happy they're going to have another little brother or sister." Elaine froze when she heard those words. It meant Sterling had children with other women, and he was helping them with housing. How many secrets was the man she considered her husband concealing? Olivia noticed Elaine had overheard the conversation, and her face went white with fear. "Marina Vance, not here," the nurse whispered, trying to move the pregnant woman away from the manager's office. But it was too late. Elaine had heard enough to understand the scale of the deception. Sterling had not only deprived her of the ability to have children, he was also fathering them with other women. The patient left. Olivia remained standing in the hallway, unsure what to do. Elaine walked out of the office with the logbook in her hands and approached the nurse. "How many children does he have?" she asked, looking directly into the young woman's eyes. Olivia tried to deny it, but her gaze gave everything away. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, but her voice trembled with distress. "Dr. Thames just helps patients. He's a good doctor." Elaine shook her head, realizing that the nurse was either deceived herself or was an accomplice in this complex deception. At that moment, the security guard's phone rang. He had been watching them from his booth. Elaine heard snippets of the conversation from which she understood someone was asking the man about what was happening at the practice. "Yes, sir," the guard said into the phone. "Your wife was here looking for something in your office." Olivia caught her, and they were talking about something. Elaine realized she had little time left. Sterling would surely find out about her visit now and try to hide or destroy the incriminating documents. She quickly took photographs of the logbook page with the IUD disposal entry, as well as several other suspicious entries, on her phone. Olivia stood nearby, clearly in a state of internal conflict. On one hand, she was loyal to Sterling. On the other, she saw his wife suffering and knew something was terribly wrong. The pregnancy test in her hand was eloquent proof that she was more than just a nurse to the practice manager. Elaine decided to take a risk. "Is it his?" she asked, pointing to the test in Olivia's hand. The nurse didn't answer, but her silence was more telling than any words. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pressed the test to her chest, as if shielding her future child from a cruel world. "He promised me he would divorce you," Olivia finally said, barely audible. "He told me you were sick, that you couldn't have children, that your marriage was long dead. I didn't know that he was the one who made you sick." These words served as a confession, confirming Elaine's worst fears. "How many children do you have together?" Elaine asked, feeling her world spin with horror. Olivia looked up at her, her eyes full of tears and remorse. "Two," she whispered. "Macy, she's 5. And Isaac, he's 3. They think Daddy works in another city, which is why he rarely comes home." Elaine felt the ground disappear from beneath her feet. It turned out that while she was suffering from the pain caused by the embedded IUD, Sterling was creating a parallel family with a young nurse. He was raising the children he had deprived her of. He played the role of a loving father to some and an indifferent husband to another. The security guard finished his conversation and headed toward them, clearly having received instructions from Sterling. "Elaine Thames," he said with forced politeness, "I need to ask you to leave the building. The manager said you do not have the right to be here without his presence." Elaine knew her time was up. She quickly left the practice, taking with her the document photographs and the terrible knowledge of her husband's double life. In the car, she called Detective Blunt and told her what she had learned. Now they had not only proof of a crime against her health, but also a motive explaining Sterling's actions. Detective Blunt listened carefully and promised to immediately question Olivia Ree as a witness. She also planned to obtain a warrant to search Sterling's home and workplace to seize all documents that might shed light on his criminal activity. Elaine drove home, realizing her life was utterly ruined. The man she trusted most in the world was capable of monstrous betrayal. He had not only deprived her of her health and the possibility of motherhood, but had also deceived her for years, building a family with another woman. Now she had to find the strength for a final confrontation with the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court, the exposure, the need to prove what seemed unbelievable. But most importantly, she needed to learn to live again, free from illusions about the love and loyalty of the man who had betrayed her in the cruelest way. If you enjoy this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. The house greeted Elaine with its usual silence. But now that silence felt sinister, full of hidden secrets and lies. She walked into Sterling's home office, where his personal computer sat, a machine she'd never had reason to use before. She guessed the password on the third attempt. It was his mother's birthday, the person he considered most important in his life. The desktop was neatly organized. Folders contained medical documents, scientific articles, photographs from conferences. But one folder with an unusual name stood out, Forever Now, which immediately caught her attention. Elaine clicked on it, and her heart froze at what appeared on the screen. Inside the folder were hundreds of photographs of Olivia in intimate poses, pictures of their trips together, romantic dinners, and outings with small children. In one photo, Sterling was holding a girl of about 5 who looked strikingly like him. Next to her stood a younger boy, also bearing his characteristic features. These were Macy and Isaac that Olivia had mentioned. But the most terrifying discovery was the correspondence that spanned over 5 years. Elaine opened the message file and started reading, feeling everything inside her constrict with horror with every line. The correspondence began with ordinary work questions but gradually moved into personal confessions and plans for the future. In one message dated 3 years prior, Sterling wrote to Olivia about his plans. "Don't worry, darling. I solved the problem with Elaine once and for all. I gave her a little gift during her appendectomy. She definitely won't be having kids now, and we can be together without any more questions about heirs." Elaine reread the message several times, unable to believe her own eyes. It meant Sterling had coldly planned her sterilization, discussing it with his mistress as if it were a routine work task. He hadn't simply yielded to a momentary impulse during surgery, he had prepared for this crime in advance. The correspondence became even more cynical. Sterling told Olivia how he comforted his wife when she complained of pain, how he prescribed useless treatments, knowing the true cause of her suffering. He even joked about it, calling himself a brilliant doctor who had solved 2 problems at once, getting rid of the need to have children with his wife and gaining the opportunity to start a new family. In another folder, Elaine found scanned copies of bank documents that completely shattered her image of her husband. Monthly transfers to Olivia Ree for $5,000 labeled alimony for Macy and Isaac. It turned out Sterling was officially supporting 2 children by his mistress while convincing his wife that their family budget wouldn't allow them to have children of their own. There were also documents for the purchase of an apartment in Olivia's name, insurance policies for the children, and plans for their education. Sterling had created a full-fledged parallel family into which he poured not only money but also emotion. In the correspondence, he called Macy his princess and Isaac his heir. Meanwhile, he viewed his wife as a burden to be discarded in the least painful way possible. It was especially painful to read the messages from the past few months, where Sterling discussed divorce plans with Olivia. He wrote that he would wait until Elaine developed cancer from the embedded IUD, then he could divorce her under the pretense of not being able to handle the psychological stress of his wife's illness. Public opinion would be on his side, and the assets would remain his. Elaine saved all the discovered files onto a flash drive, understanding that these were the key pieces of evidence of her husband's crime. But emotionally, she was completely shattered, realizing the extent of the betrayal. The man she had lived with for 15 years hadn't just deceived her, he had methodically destroyed her life, planning every step of that destruction. The phone rang. Detective Blunt's name lit up the screen. "Elaine Thames," the familiar voice said. "I have news for you, and it's not good. We received the results of the additional tissue analysis taken during the surgery. You have precancerous changes of the 3rd degree. This is a direct consequence of the long-term presence of the carcinogenic IUD in your system." Elaine listened to the detective's explanation, feeling numb with horror. It meant Sterling hadn't just deprived her of the ability to have children, he had effectively sentenced her to a painful death from cancer. If she hadn't gone to Dr. Oakley, she would have developed advanced cancer in a year or two with minimal chances of recovery. Detective Blunt continued to explain the legal aspects of the case. Sterling now faced charges not only of causing grievous bodily harm but also attempted murder. The maximum sentence for the combined charges could be up to 15 years in prison. The detective also informed her that she had obtained a warrant to search the house and seize all documents related to the case. Elaine told her about the discovered correspondence and bank documents that confirmed the motive for the crime. Detective Blunt listened carefully and asked her not to touch the computer until the experts arrived, so as not to compromise the integrity of the digital evidence. The search was scheduled for the next morning, but the detective warned that Sterling might try to return home and destroy the evidence. Just as Elaine finished her conversation with Detective Blunt, she heard the front door open in the hallway. Her heart stopped with fear. She hadn't expected Sterling to return so early. "Honey," his voice called out from the hallway. "I'm back early. I have a surprise for you." His tone sounded as usual, affectionate and caring, but now that affection felt like a repulsive mask. Elaine quickly closed all the files on the computer but left the screen with the correspondence open. Let him see that his secret was exposed. Let him understand that the game was over. She took the container with the extracted IUD from her purse, which Dr. Harmon had given her as physical evidence. Sterling's steps approached the office, and Elaine braced herself for the hardest conversation of her life. She was about to look into the eyes of the man who had been methodically killing her for 8 years while playing the role of a loving husband and caring doctor. She had to find the strength to stand against his lies and manipulations. The office door opened, and Sterling appeared in the doorway with a bouquet of red roses in his hands. He looked rested and happy, clearly anticipating a reunion with his wife after a week apart. But his expression instantly changed when he saw Elaine at his computer with the correspondence open on the screen. "Elaine," he said uncertainly, "what are you doing here? Why are you going through my computer?" His voice trembled, and his eyes darted between the screen and his wife's face, trying to assess the scale of the disaster. The roses dropped from his hands and scattered across the floor, symbolically ending their family idyll. Elaine silently turned the monitor toward him so he could read his own words about giving her a little gift during the surgery. Sterling went pale, realizing his most terrible secrets were exposed. Fear flashed in his eyes, then anger, then fear again. He knew his career, reputation, and freedom were hanging by a thread. "It's not what you think," he began, trying to find an explanation for the inexplicable. "I can explain everything. It was a medical necessity. You don't understand all the circumstances." But his voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. His words were confused, and his hands trembled with nervous strain. Elaine stood up from the desk and walked toward him, holding the container with the blackened IUD. "Here's your little gift," she said quietly, but her voice was steel. "For 8 years, you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, deprived me of the ability to have children, drove me to a precancerous condition, and all this time, you played the role of a loving husband." Sterling tried to snatch the container from her hands, but Elaine backed away. His mask finally slipped, and she saw the true face of the man she had lived with for half her life. It was the face of a predator cornered, ready to do anything to save his own skin, a man for whom she had never been anything more than an obstacle to happiness with another woman. Sterling stood in the office doorway. His face rapidly changed expression, from surprise to comprehension, from fear to despair. The roses lay on the floor, their red petals scattered across the carpet, creating a sinister picture of a ruined idol. He saw his correspondence with Olivia on the computer screen, understood that his most terrible secrets were exposed, but still tried to find a way to wriggle out of the situation. "Elaine, what are you doing here?" he repeated, taking a step into the room. "Why are you digging through my personal files? This is a violation of privacy. You have no right." His voice trembled with nervous strain, and his hands clenched into fists. He was still trying to play the role of the offended husband whose privacy had been violated. Elaine slowly turned to him, holding the container with the blackened IUD in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the cold fire of righteous anger. "Is this your surprise?" she asked quietly, holding up the container. "For 8 years, you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, deprived me of the ability to have children, drove me to a precancerous condition." Sterling lunged at her, trying to snatch the evidence from her hands. "Give that to me," he yelled, losing the last shreds of his self-control. "You don't understand what you're doing. This could ruin my career, my reputation." Elaine dodged him, pressing the container to her chest. For the first time in all their years of marriage, she saw her husband's true face, without masks or pretense. At that moment, footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Detective Blunt's voice cut through the tense silence. "Sterling Nicholas Thames," she said in an official tone, walking into the office accompanied by 2 police officers. "You are under arrest on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Sterling turned to the newcomers, his face contorted with horror. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, trying to maintain his dignity. "I am a respected doctor, a practice manager. I have an impeccable reputation. You can't arrest me based on the delusional accusations of my mentally unstable wife." Detective Blunt pulled out handcuffs, her face remaining professionally impassive. "We have all the necessary evidence, including medical examination results, IUD disposal documents, and witness testimony. Your wife has provided us with correspondence in which you yourself confessed to the crime committed." Just then, Olivia burst into the house. Her face was streaming with tears, and she was clutching her cell phone. "Sterling," she cried. "The guard at the clinic called me and said the police arrived. What's going on?" Seeing the handcuffs in the detective's hands, she rushed to her lover, trying to shield him. "I'll tell you everything," Olivia sobbed, turning to Detective Blunt. "It was his idea, not mine. He told me his wife was infertile from birth, that they hadn't lived as husband and wife for ages. I didn't know that he made her sick himself." Her confession poured out, destroying Sterling's last hopes of salvation. Sterling pushed Olivia away and turned to Elaine, a final attempt to justify his actions flashing in his eyes. "I did this for us," he said desperately. "You yourself said you weren't ready for children, that you wanted to build your career first. I just helped you avoid an unwanted pregnancy." Elaine looked at him with disgust, unable to believe this man was still trying to shift the blame onto her. "I wanted to wait a year, not become permanently infertile," she replied coldly. "You deprived me of the right to choose, sentenced me to suffering and illness, and all for her, for your children with your mistress." Detective Blunt put the handcuffs on Sterling.